What is unregulated capitalism? Unregulated capitalism, or laissez-faire, or let do or permit, was an argument to let capital rather than governments decide about commerce. It arose initially opposing mercantilism and government interference in the markets under Locke in France. One of the first big results that it triumphed was the success of the international slave trade that it put down to lack of government interference, i.e., allowing the markets to dictate rather than morals or regulation. This was then rebranded as monetary liberalism in the 19th century and championed by those supporting Adam Smith. It was used by its supporters to justify the deaths from famine in Ireland, the justification being that it was God's will, otherwise there would be a market solution via the invisible hand. Completely misunderstanding and misstating the underlying principle. Unregulated capitalism in the U.S. led to adulterated foods in the U.S., notably the swill milk scandal in the 19th century, monopolization, and the growth of the robber barons. This sentiment and ideology survive today in the neoliberal and libertarian philosophies. The main argument being that capital should be free to make the choices over anyone else as creates wealth. Torts and other dangers to be dealt with by the courts rather than regulations, i.e., they become largely civil issues rather than criminal. This would include potential injuries and premature death. For example, like Ford and the Explorer issues, rather than pay for safe cars, Ford made a calculation on the likelihood of lawsuits, the cost of defense and payouts rather than correcting dangerous defects. Unsurprisingly, many advocates seem to have a legal background. Without wholesale reform of the courts and some sort of democratization of counsel, then it would confirm that those with capital make the rules at the expense of those without. Those without would largely see the enrichment of the ambulance-chasing class action lawyers, and often these would be retrospective actions, i.e., once the damage had been done and the profits extracted. Companies could then potentially declare bankruptcy and avoid penalties. Capitalism, particularly unregulated capitalism, arguably creates outsized profits because of unpriced externalities, notably health and environmental issues. Whether this has been polluted water, extinction of species, despoiled and dangerous landscapes, polluted air, worker health, etc., it is often the owner that reaps most of the benefits but the surrounding community at large that pays the costs. This can be extended into modern-day capitalism with, for example, the outsized profits made by the social media and internet companies largely at the cost of privacy and free speech. However, creating a surplus is important for both investment and development, so capitalism and market forces remain the best way to achieving that with the correct incentives, regulation and taxation. However, it is IMHO just that those who profit should also pay the cost of damages and not get a free ride on the wider community, so externalities need to be priced in and regulations created should be effective and goal-driven. Unregulated capitalism, otherwise known as laissez-faire capitalism, is capitalism read in tooth and claw, competition in the marketplace without any constraints by government or by regulation. Like the capitalism we are all accustomed to, laissez-faire capitalism is an economic system based on the private ownership of the means of production and their operation for profit. Its central characteristics include private property and the recognition of property rights, capital accumulation, waged labor, voluntary exchange, a price system and competitive markets. However, in an unregulated market, anything goes if it furthers profits for business owners or investors. No other stakeholder group is recognized as having any rights. Neither is the notion of market failure, such as market control via monopoly power and lobbying, externalities such as pollution, or imperfect information, insider information, so that the allocation of goods and services isn't Pareto efficient. It is inherently unstable because the most ruthless always come to dominate. This dominant elite is forced to spend more and more money on suppressing the anger and distress of the bulk of the population.